Welcome to Spaceballs The Episode. Yes, in this week's episode of the Maza's Musings podcast, we are going to be talking about one of the classic spoof movies, and that is Spaceballs. I will be joined by Matt from Pop Culture Chats with Ryan and Matt to talk about this just absolute classic of a movie. I would say not just one of the best spoof comedies, but one of the best comedies ever put on film. You may notice that my background is a little bit different today if you are watching on video. That's because I'm recording this from the recording studio at my work because this week has been all kinds of topsy-turvy. And a little bit of that is because my anniversary was yesterday, Wednesday. I'm recording this on Thursday. And yeah, we'll get into that a little bit in Maza's Mickey Minute. But before we talk about my anniversary or Spaceballs, let's laugh.
And now it's time for Meghan's
Cuckoo bananas.
Hi, Meghan.
Hi.
Do you have a joke for us today?
Yes, and Mickey wants to hear it too.
Okay.
What fish is most likely to get famous?
I don't know. What fish is most likely to get famous?
A starfish.
Oh, that's a good one. What do you think, Mickey? Okay.
Bye.
Time to say goodbye.
Bye.
All right, now let's move on to this anniversary edition of Maza's Mickey Minute.
Donald, wake up! It's showtime! Don't forget the orchestra!
Ah, there you are. And just in time.
Mom says there's even more magical stuff now.
For those of you standing, please hold on to the handrails throughout our journey and stay clear of the doors.
Hang on to them hats and glasses, because this here's the wildest ride in the wilderness.
And here we go!
All right, well, Eileen and I celebrated our 14th wedding anniversary just yesterday, Wednesday. And when looking up what the theme was for an anniversary for 14 years, it's apparently ivory. Now, of course, with cruelty-free stuff these days, which obviously we want to subscribe to, it's been more suggested that something be elephant-themed. I had a really hard time finding things that were elephant-themed that was something that we'd actually use. So Eileen ended up getting a non-elephant, an elephant-free gift. But with that in mind, I decided that for this week's Maza's Mickey Minute, I was going to look at some of the famous elephants that have made appearances in Disney. So, of course, the first one, obviously, is Dumbo, which had its debut as an animated film in 1941. And, of course, along with that, who can forget the song Pink Elephants on Parade? Now, Dumbo obviously was later immortalized at the Disney parks as a ride, and then later it was remade as a live-action film by Tim Burton. I haven't seen that movie yet. The reviews were kind of mixed. I'm willing to bet that you have to be a Tim Burton fan to really appreciate that movie. We have The Jungle Book, where Colonel Hathi was the leader of the Jungle Patrol. And that patrol included his wife, Winifred, and their son, Hathi. And Hathi Jr. obviously makes friends with Mowgli, and Mowgli is trying to be an elephant. And it's a great little scene there with a great kind of marching tune. In The Lion King, obviously, there's the elephant graveyard. In Tarzan, Tantor is Tarzan's neurotic elephant friend. In Fantasia, you can't forget the elephants that perform ballet with the hippos. Now, this next one isn't necessarily Disney, I don't think. Disney may have produced it, but didn't distribute it like Buena Vista did, I think. But George of the Jungle with Brendan Fraser, which was a favorite of mine and my sister when we were younger. He's got an elephant pet that he thinks is a dog named Shep. Of course, in Aladdin, Abu is turned into an elephant by the genie. In the Mickey Mouse Club, which we saw a lot when Meghan was little, there's a baby elephant that sometimes is one of Toodle's tools. And the ways in which the baby elephant is used to solve problems, sometimes creative, sometimes a little head scratching. Like, not sure where you got that, but okay. And we already mentioned one ride, but we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the elephants in the Jungle Cruise. And of course, those are animatronic elephants. But then if you go over to Animal Kingdom, you've got the African elephants on the Kilimanjaro safaris. So this is just a quick list of some of the elephants that have been featured in Disney, whether it be at the parks or in media. I have a question, though. Do heffalumps count? Let me know. And let me know if I missed any. Shoot me an email at mazasmusings@gmail.com or on social media, and we'll give you all the information on how to find us on social media at the end of the episode. And when it comes to elephants, whether you want to fly with Dumbo or head out on safari with the African elephants, We Do Travel Right can help you out. We Do Travel Right offers that concierge level service, the one-on-one attention of an agent who also has the power of an entire team behind them, including the dining team, which will help you get those hard to get dining reservations. And your agent will help you with all of the ins and outs of the park, whether it's park tickets, reserving hotels, understanding how the park works or how the apps work, all of this kind of stuff. However much information you feel you need and how much guidance you need, they will help provide that for you. And the best thing about it is it's free. Yeah, you don't pay anything else by using We Do Travel Right. Why is that? Well, that's because Disney, Universal, cruise lines, all-inclusives, they all build the use of an agent into their pricing. So you're paying to use the agent, whether you're using the agent or not. So why wouldn't you use the agent? So if you are interested in getting your next magical vacation started today, go to wedotravelright.com/Maza. That's wedotravelright.com/MAZA and get your next magical vacation started today. And that is this week's Maza's Mickey Minute.
Now I can't do any more damage around this popsicle stand.
So long, partner.
See you real soon.
Now we'll get right into our main topic of the day, which is Spaceballs the episode with Matt Conway. And here we go.
Ludicrous Speed, go!
And welcome, Matt Conway of Pop Culture Chats with Ryan and Matt for joining, and thank you for joining me once again for another talk about movies. And quite frankly, this is one of my favorite movies that we're going to be talking about today, and that is Spaceballs. And just wanted to make note, apparently we are inadvertently live right now, so probably on YouTube, and that's because I forgot to turn off the live button. So here we are live. So let's I guess just get right into this. So at Ludicrous Speed,
I love it. I
And
thank you firstly so much for having me on, because when this news of Spaceballs 2 came up, which we'll get to later, I think for people like you and me and all the fans of Spaceballs, it just brought the movie back into the front lobe of our brain. And it was just like, oh my God, wasn't Spaceballs such a great movie? So I joked with you before we started recording, but to me, this was like just a great excuse to revisit the Mel Brooks classic and get to kind of deep dive into why it's so great.
well, I mean, obviously, I don't need an excuse to watch Spaceballs, but if I can manufacture one, sure, I'm going to take that opportunity too. But before we get into it, of course, I mentioned that Matt is one of the hosts of Pop Culture Chats with Ryan and Matt, but Matt it's just Matt today. Ryan is not with us, but I want to give you the opportunity to kind of reintroduce yourself to those who have listened to us before, and introduce yourself to any new audience members.
Yeah, firstly, thanks for having me on, Chris. My name is Matt. As Chris said, I'm the co-host of Pop Culture Chats with Ryan and Matt. We talk about a really wide assortment of topics, from the NBA to NFL to movies to video games, you name it, Sopranos. We kind of go through the gamut of topics. I also have a past as a film critic. I wrote reviews for over a decade, so I have a deep appreciation for movies. Still go all the time. Sometimes it's a waste of my time, but I still find myself running through the gamut. So yeah, I have a great appreciation for movies. So really, always excited to come on and talk about movies with you.
Well, the funny thing is, a lot of times when people think about movie critics, they think about people who are going to really appreciate the highbrow movies, and Spaceballs certainly does not fit into that category. But it's one that I think that whether you're a critic or not, you can certainly say that it is a classic.
100%.
So I guess the one thing that I've been thinking a lot about since the announcement that there was going to be Spaceballs 2, with Josh Gad is teaming up with Mel Brooks to produce that. When I watched the trailer for it with the crawl, and it's going through all these movies, and there have been 8 Predator movies, and that doesn't count the Alien versus Predator movies, and then there are 6 other Alien movies, and it's going through the whole thing, and but there's only been one Spaceballs. It's really held up really well, I think, and for me, I think one of the main reasons why it does is because it has this perfect blend of some slapstick comedy. It's got, some other pop culture. Obviously, most of it, is spoofing Star Wars. So it's already got a font of material to make fun of, but then it also draws in some other pop culture references on top of it. There's the one-liners, there are all these little bits. So I think that one of the things that really makes it all work is there's such a good mix of different kinds of humor, and it really it's really one of Mel Brooks's best works from that perspective. Is there are all kinds of different ways that he's making you laugh throughout this film.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting to look at as a time capsule in a few contexts. First, like you mentioned with Mel Brooks, it almost was like his last great parody spoof movie, or at least one of his last. And it's a movie that really encapsulated his very distinct comedic mark. Obviously, we've had a lot of people, continue or to carry the torch for parody films, but few have had such a kind of incisive perspective as Mel Brooks. I mean, his parodies, there is a real love and appreciation for the subject matter he's often satirizing. So I think that really brings a level of respect, but there's an ability to really discover these hilarious kind of nooks and crevices within these worlds and the material that I think makes his work stand out so strongly. And then you just look at this from the perspective of Star Wars. I mean, this comes 4 years after Revenge or Return of the Jedi. Star Wars fans everywhere were just crazed. Are we ever going to get more movies? Are we ever going to get prequels? And this was something that it didn't break the bank when it came out at the box office or anything like that, but it grew over time to have such a big, passionate cult audience. And I think part of that's because even George Lucas loves the movie. He's even acknowledged that he's laughed a bunch, and I'm sure we can talk a bit about it, kind of his funny dynamic with this film over the years.
No, yeah, and I think you're absolutely right in that one of the things that I think has kept this movie relevant is that Star Wars has remained relevant. So, you can show this to, I mean, I'm in my 40s. I'm wearing my May the 40s be with you shirt. And boy, I've been feeling the 40s lately. My back has been killing me.
Oh, no.
But someone like me whether it's somebody who saw the original Star Wars in theaters or someone who's, well, I guess you're basically 20 years younger than I am, or somewhere around there. But it still makes sense to, a bunch of different generations and different ages. And, that's why so many of the jokes still land is, the material that it is spoofing still has such relevance today.
Yeah. And I think it's really funny. You look at someone who's a big, film nerd, the more modern attempts to make these kind of satire parody movies, a lot of them were really flimsy. And it's like, oh, we just kind of want to capitalize on this being popular. And there was no coherence to the approach. And that's why I think the genre has kind of slowly faded from existence, when even after Mel Brooks and Spaceballs and the Zucker brothers with Airplane, we had movies like Scary Movie in the 2000s that were big hits. But you compare it to Spaceballs, this movie has such a great understanding of the Star Wars narrative framework. You have the kind of the Han Solo Luke hybrid with our main character. He's kind of the wistful dreamer, but he's also kind of the reckless, scoundrel. So very clever kind of screenwriting there. But you have your C-3PO, but with Joan Rivers. I mean, there's just such a great idea and approach of taking that framework of A New Hope and just kind of making little twists and turns to make it a lot more personable and comedic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that on top of understanding and appreciating the original films that he was basing this on, he also had a pretty good understanding of the audience too. And he knew ways that it wasn't just, okay, I'm going to make fun of this and people who think that Star Wars is goofy are going to laugh at it. He made something that Star Wars fans are going to laugh at too. So, it really resonates with fans because he did have that understanding of both sides of it, both from the making of it side and the audience side. And I think that was because he was a fan of the movies himself. So this was kind of a natural. It felt very natural because of that, his understanding as a filmmaker and as a fan of film too. So.
Yeah, and also the cultural impact. I mean, one of the best jokes of all of Spaceballs is merchandise, where we go through all of Yogurt's collection of varied Spaceballs merchandise. And, it's a shame George Lucas didn't let this movie get merchandise because, man, that Spaceballs flamethrower, I think that would have been quite the dangerous Christmas gift. I think that would have gave Ralphie's BB gun a run for its money.
Well, I mean, still today, though, I will see people walking around with like Spaceballs the T-shirt or driving around in the car that has Spaceballs the bumper sticker. So people have managed to capitalize on it, just not Not Mel Brooks.
Yeah, just not Mel Brooks. But that was a great device for commenting on how Star Wars became this commercialized juggernaut in a way and dominated the marketplace. And but it was done respectfully. It wasn't something that was like denigrating fans or anything. It was just a funny way of commenting on how Star Wars had this almost Beatle-esque impact on the culture, where it really just consumed the mass interest.
I think it's also a little bit of a nod to Lucas's, I don't know if he, I don't know if savvy is the right word. I don't know if he knew it was going to be quite this big, but his ability to maintain the rights for, the for the merchandise, because then Fox was just like, fine, you can have that, that's fine, and that became such a cash cow for him over the years. So again, appreciating the artist as well as the art, so we've already started mentioning some of the favorite and classic jokes and gags in this, so I'm just going to go ahead with another one of my favorites is basically that entire Ludicrous Speed scene. From start to finish, that scene is it's one of those perfect blends of some witty dialogue with the physical elements of the whole thing, completing with him going flying and crashing into the into the front of the ship, and coming out with his helmet flattened and his glasses broken. It's just such from start to finish, it's just one of the most perfect comedic scenes, and it's still one of those things that I'll just break out. I did it already in this episode. I'll break out Ludicrous Speed as a reference, because that one is just, when I think of Spaceballs, that's one of the first things that I think of.
Yeah, and I think that whole bit is such a great reflection of just Rick Moranis's approach with Dark Helmet, of always making him the butt of the joke. There's such an arrogance and a brashness to the character, and he thinks he's so awesome with his Schwartz and all of that. But he continually, time and time again, gets himself in trouble with his own kind of negligence and just lack of understanding of the situation. And like you said, it's one of those scenes that just has so many little funny quirks to it. I love when Colonel Sanders, he's like, calls him a chicken with the KFC joke. But then when Colonel Sanders calls for Ludicrous Speed, he even talks like a chicken. He says, "Prepare the ship for," and then he corrects himself and says, "Prepare the ship for Ludicrous Speed." So there's all these little great gags. And when the ship goes Ludicrous Speed and you see the plaid, and
they've gone to plaid.
Yeah. There's just so many little wrinkles where, even watching again now, it's like there's a little nook that you appreciate more than I'd probably appreciated the previous time that I viewed it.
And low key, with all of the other like quotable lines, like they've gone to plaid, when in the midst of that, when he says, "My brains are going into my feet," it's just like the timing of the joke and the delivery of it is just perfect. And you're right, Rick Moranis throughout this really has a really good appreciation of what he wanted to do with the character, and really nailed it. One of the things that I think is great that he does, and that Mel Brooks did with that character, is using the helmet itself as a constant running gag. It's constantly a source of entertainment and usually humiliation for Dark Helmet. I mean, beyond just the initial ridiculousness of the size of the helmet, the number of times that, like even that opening scene, he comes in and then he has to like throw the mask up. I can't breathe in this thing, and we talked about him crashing into basically the dashboard of the ship. There's another scene where, he's, and this is another scene that I want to get into, but there's the close up when he goes Lone Star, and then the camera just keeps going and like crashes into the helmet and he falls over. So there are so many of these little things where they use the helmet as a vehicle for another little bout of humor without making it feel cheap.
Yeah. It's such a great thing to satirize because that was such a indelible figure in the Star Wars mythos, the menace of the helmet and the ominous breath, the it was such an indelible symbol that it made so much sense to really poke fun at it in so many different fun ways. And I just love his whole costume in general. He has kind of this, he has the cape, he has all these flourishes, but then he has like the black tie and kind of this almost lackey like outfit, because ultimately, similar to Darth Vader, he really is just the number one lackey to the big boss at the end of the day. But he portrays it in a much more of a buffoon-esque manner. But I really do, like you said, think they did a great job of transforming the helmet, that symbol, into a great arsenal for jokes.
You're right on with the costume in general. I was just going to say, the more you look at it, the more ridiculous it is. Like at first when he comes in, it's funny because he's got the big helmet and everything like that. But if you pause it, you're right. He's got the tie, like he's got kind of like these puffy shorts on, like these jester's shorts, and like it just, the more and more you dive into that costume, and then the juxtaposition of all of it together just adds this subtle ridiculous element to the whole thing.
Yeah, and I think honestly all the characters you go through, the kind of costume design for everything here is really exceptional, and I think it shows Brooks' adoration for Star Wars. I mean, obviously Lone Star, he's got the drifter jacket like Han Solo, but I mean Pizza the Hut, every time I look at Pizza the Hut, I'm like, wow, this is an incredible creation. And he's got like the sauce bumbles, popping and all this and that. And then I would be remiss if the other one I got to mention as far as character design, Barf, the way they create that kind of Chewbacca human hybrid. I just love, and I love his tail and the animatronic of that as well.
Evidently that was really, really uncomfortable, like for John Candy, because they actually had to, with the technology at the time, they had like things running up his back and everything to make the ears move and stuff like that.
Oh my gosh.
But all right, so I've kind of rattled off a couple of my favorites. Is there something that, when you think of Spaceballs and you think of the classic jokes, gags, scenes, what do you think of?
I love watching Spaceballs. To me, like, especially watching this movie as a kid, that was like the fourth wall meta nature of that to me, like almost broke my brain of like, wait, what are they doing? Like, and then you have it really run through the gamut of that the iconic Ludicrous Speed scene even comes up, and Dark Helmet's like, all right, can we fast forward this faster, keep this moving.
Never show this again.
Yeah. But just also like the whole, they go in and it's all like the classic Mel Brooks movies, and just the whole gag of them watching the screen and doing the wave and everything. And when is it coming up? Soon. And then just the whole verbal exchange they have after. I just love that moment. And I really think it captures the kind of quirky savvy of Mel Brooks' sensibility.
Yeah, it really is. It really is great. I think that along with that, they've got all these different little gags associated with parts of the ship and different functions of the ship. I always liked the jamming the radar scene because, of course, you've got Michael Winslow involved in there, and he's doing his classic. Classic sounds, but it really is. It's when he calls him over with the intercom.
I love when he does that when he's right next to them.
Right. And then they take it away.
Yeah.
But yeah. So like, there's that, and then there's the whole there's the Mr. Coffee and the Mr. Radar. What's all this churning and bubbling? You call that a radar screen? No, sir. We call it Mr. Coffee. And then he gets the coffee and he's just like, I always drink coffee when I watch Radar. And then they step over and the radar screen is called Mr. Radar. So,
like you mentioned, the Michael Winslow, what an incredible cameo! The sounds he makes are so distinctive. The bleeps, the creeps, like I can hear him making the boop, 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 boop in my mind right now.
That's actually pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I think that one character that, and I guess this also makes it resonate a little bit with current affairs as well, is the character that one of the characters that Mel Brooks plays in this film is President Scrooge, who's just the quintessential know nothing, self-important, scheming leader of the Spaceballs. And it just, there are so many little nuances to that. Like there's one there's one scene where he's when he's in the bed with the twins, and then the wall pops up and the commander is calling, and the girls hide, and he jumps up and he's reading a book. The book is upside down, and the book he's reading is Nixon's book. So it's just like there are these little things with this character, and then of course right at the end he's just like, I can't make decisions, I'm a president.
Well, I mean, literally he has his butt on backwards from the very very beginning. You have the teleporter scene where he goes from one room to the next, and then you realize, oh, it's just the next room over.
Yeah, there again, but that is another one of those, also on top of everything else, a callback to another pop culture reference, with Star Trek. And of course, even at that point, the rift that between Star Trek and Star Wars people, this was something that kind of brings everybody together and everybody can laugh together. But yeah. Yeah, why didn't anybody tell me my ass was so big?
I know Mel Brooks really did an exceptional job portraying that character, and just all the little details they kind of play with within the scientific world to kind of mock his buffoonery. I just love he has the little air cans, like the Perrier. They just like breathe in the air, like the resources are so bad, and he has this whole like cockamamie plan to steal the air of the planet for their own, and it's just it is such a beautiful representation of just a gutless and callous kind of leader. And yeah, it's definitely resonated through the annals of history.
And of course, we've talked about Dark Helmet. We've talked about President Scrooge. And this is, there's one scene that kind of like ties the two of them together early on. And it's when he tells them to comb the desert.
Yes.
And then sure enough, there they are with the ace combs combing the desert. And Colonel Sanders is just like, sir, are we being too literal here? No, you fool. Said comb the desert.
And that whole scene's a great set, like a great context of Mel Brooks' joke ability, because you have the big comb, and then you see the smallest comb, and then obviously the iconic line.
Of course. And one of my favorite parts of that, and again, it's the little subtle things, like there are the big jokes and then there are the little jokes. When Colonel Sanders asks if they're being too literal, Rick Moranis turns and like talks to him through the megaphone when he's standing right next to him. And then when he's done talking to Colonel Sanders, he puts down the microphone and puts his hand to and yells to the Spaceballs who are combing the desert, "Found anything yet?" It's just one of those stupid little things that, like, the humor in between these like bigger jokes that really helps kind of make it, keeps the ridiculousness consistent so that the jokes feel like they fit.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of times what you'll see with other spoof movies and things like that is it's just either ridiculous thing, regular stuff, ridiculous thing, or it's just all ridiculous all the time at like 11, you know? And either one of those is kind of hard to stay with for a while.
Yeah, I like that you mentioned that. There is a real logic to the world and how it operates and how the characters operate. And I think you find that throughout the film.
I love, you know, the one thing that you had to find an interesting way to make like a Death Star like threat. And of course, in this movie, it's the Mega Maid. Which is just, I mean, it works because of what they're trying to do, what they're trying to get from Druidia, which is the air. But just like there's the ridiculous element to it, just like it really is. And then when they're able to reverse it and she goes from suck to blow. By the way, this episode is rated PG-13, so any small children should probably not be listening anyway. But yeah, I thought that the Mega Maid was just a great, you know, you had to find something that was going to be silly enough, but still work, you know, in terms of being that ominous thing that is going to destroy the planet. And Mega Maid works as far as I'm concerned because it is silly, but there's also a functionality to the gag. So, you know, it's like it makes sense why it's silly like that.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think honestly, one of the underrated things I appreciated watching Spaceballs this time around is, like we've talked about, there is this consistent kind of, you know, colorful, you know, comedic, you know, undertone to everything. But I really think Bill Pullman as Lone Star, and then also I think Daphne Zunga as Princess Vespa, they do kind of ground the material in a way and give the story at least some kind of gravity and seriousness, even though you know exactly the motions it's going to go through. I think both are really great at that, at having some kind of presence within the movie while still being very much game for the comedic aspects of their character. I really love Bill Pullman's an actor who I've really grown to appreciate. I mean, Independence Day obviously has so many great movies throughout the years, but this, I feel like he really has that Han Solo bravado, but it's just portrayed in a kind of a sketchier, you know, 30% more of a kind of a burnout loser tone to it that I think is really amusing. Like he thinks he's Han Solo, but he's not really. Like that's kind of the whole gag with his character. So I really had a great appreciation for those performances as kind of the grounding force for the story at play.
No, yeah, I right down to the fact that he's flying a Winnebago, you know, and you see the inside of it, and it's like a total like trash heap inside. Of course, he's living in there with a Mog, so you know it's to be expected. You notice that there's also I think even a fire hydrant inside the the Winnebago for barf.
Yeah.
Again, these little subtle things that are in there, you know, like they obviously thought about the costumes and the set pieces quite a bit, you know, and there are so many visual comedic things along with the slapstick and you know and just verbal banter that really, you know, it's so very well rounded.
Yeah, and I just, one of the most underrated gags I would be remiss not to mention is the very opening of the movie. The classic ship crawl which is the ultimate like way to welcome your audience into this movie and kind of set the tone, because it really becomes this test of patience. As the giant ship, we have the ominous, panning through the ship.
You've got the Jaws music playing.
And it just keeps going and going. And I when I was watching it this weekend, I literally rewinded it. It's like about 2 minutes of just the camera panning through and through. And it's such a great gag because it deconstructs this classic, Star Wars image we have of the menacing ship, traveling through. And just like we've said with a lot of these other gags, putting a really, clever, goofy, but also adoring kind of spin on it. So I definitely wanted to mention that as one of the standouts.
Well, even right before that, with the opening crawl, it's got the whole, it starts with chapter 11, and then there's it goes through the story a little bit, and then at the very end it says, if you can read this, you don't need glasses, So again, playfully like nudging the original content while doing so lovingly.
Yeah, 100%.
All right, I feel like I've been rattling off a whole bunch here, so feel free to step in at any point. But
I gotta mention again, I love the final standoff at the end between Dark Helmet and Lone Star, and I think the gag that stands out the most is I'm gonna totally botch what he says, but I am your father's uncle's nephew's roommate, and then Lone Star, what does that mean? And he's like, absolutely nothing. But I just love that whole scene, them with their little Schwartz rings and them getting entangled, all the little like gags that come along.
I hate it when my Schwartz gets twisted.
Yeah. All these little great gags that come with like deconstructing the classic Star Wars lightsaber duel. So I just really love that whole climax, and of course you have to conclude it with using that big old helmet yet again. He hits the button that the one magic switch that somehow destroys everything, just like in Star Wars. So I think that scene is not only great as being kind of the climax of this movie, but also really twisting a lot of the great fabric of the Star Wars climax.
Well, and that showdown, that standoff at the end also has another one of my favorite lines, which is now you see that evil will always triumph because good is dumb.
It is such a great representation of Dark Helmet's like simplistic and so moronic kind of worldview, but there is just something so hilarious about how stupid it is.
I mean, I feel like there are about 20 to 25 lines that I could pick out of this movie and like throw into everyday conversation.
For sure.
So a lot of times people think that a quotable movie is really what makes a good movie. I mean, or makes a great movie.
Mm-hmm.
Old School's a really quotable movie. I won't ever call Old School a great movie.
Yeah.
It's a fun movie. It's not a great movie. Spaceballs is a great movie because it has so much going on in between all of those quotable lines. So, yeah. So I'm not sure. So I have some hesitance I'm very hesitant when it comes to Spaceballs 2.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm already accepting it's not going to be as good as the first because the first is an absolute classic. What I'm wondering is if at his age, as funny as he may still be or find himself, he's got to be in his 90s, right? Mel Brooks,
definitely upper 90s, I think.
And I don't know what kind of experience Josh Gad has with writing a movie. I'm pausing for you to
He
say
has a lot of
something.
experience as a playwright, and I think I will say this: he is someone who's very much a student of the Mel Brooks sensibility. And I even saw his last show on Broadway. I'm blanking on the Gutenberg is actually what it was called, with Andrew Rannells. But his kind of screwball sensibility, I think, is something that you really much can feel as a byproduct of kind of the Mel Brooks era. So I do think Josh Gad is someone good to team up with, in the sense where it's someone who really appreciates, understands, and even I think carries on the kind of Mel Brooks energy. So I do think that team up is at least promising. But I do also get the hesitancy, just because it's like, all right, it's been 30 plus years. Why is now the moment? Is it because it's going to make a bunch of money, which I'm sure it will? Or is it because we actually have a great idea for kind of continuing the narrative? And we've seen that through Hollywood with countless movies. There's a lot of remakes that just happen to happen, and then there's some where it's like, wow, this really found an interesting new lens to kind of bring to the material.
Well, I don't at this point at his age, I don't think that Mel Brooks is really like, looking to score his next big payday. But I do wonder if there, for his purposes, if there's a legacy kind of thing, if the idea was presented to him in such a way that he thought that it was. I'm sure that people have come to him with ideas for this before, but maybe this is the first time that something that he thought would work has come across. And I hope that it's more successful than, say, some of his other second bites at the apple. The second time through with the producers was entertaining, but it's not the first one. Mm-hmm. And truthfully, I think that like inserting like Will Ferrell into it actually took away from it a bit. And his, I think it was a Hulu series or maybe a Netflix series that he did, following up History of the World, was just not good.
I was just about to mention that. Like, I was thinking of that in the back of my mind. I'm like, wow, I forgot that really existed, because like you mentioned, it should be this big, touchstone release, but it was, apparently, really mediocre. I like you just said, and that seemed to be kind of the consensus with everyone who watched it.
Yeah, I felt like with that one, it was just like, I should be laughing at this because it's Mel Brooks, but I wasn't.
Yeah. Well, I will say this with Spaceballs too. I do love that. I mean, this I think will be even more special because Rick Moranis hasn't, been in movies forever. So to have Rick Moranis like coming back and reprising one of his big roles, I think that's almost just as much of a selling point as, Mel Brooks back in the Spaceballs wheelhouse. Just because we all love Rick Moranis so much, obviously one of the classic comedic voices of his era. But also having Bill Pullman come back and a lot of the, familiar faces from the original, I think that'll be really great. And, Keke Palmer, I'm a big fan of. I know one of these days in a lot of comedies, she's been a standout. So I think, that's a great new actor to bring in. And then also Bill Pullman's son. So, I think the cast is actually rounding out to be quite promising.
Yeah, I mean, I think that bringing in Bill Pullman's son is, I mean, especially because you don't have John Candy, obviously for this film, figuring out Lone Star's sidekick, is important.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think that's where that comes in.
And his son's a really good actor too, which he was in Thunderbolts and Top Gun Maverick. So it's an actually good Nepo baby for once.
Two movies that I've yet to see, so I guess I'll have to brush up before I go see Spaceballs 2. But and this just shows how many great parts of this movie, how many great jokes there are in this movie. I just thought of one, and I would be totally remiss if I didn't bring it up. But the part where they've closed in on Princess Vespa, and Dark Helmet orders a warning shot across her nose. How many assholes do we have on this ship? I knew it. I'm surrounded by assholes.
Gosh, that's a great example of a gag. It comes into play and then it just keeps evolving and evolving and evolving until you're just kind of like laughing on the floor.
Yeah. Who is that? He's an asshole, sir. I know that, but what's his name? That is his name, sure. He's asshole, major asshole. And then it just keeps growing.
Yeah. But that's the thing that makes Spaceballs so special. It's one of those movies you can kind of just sit around and quote back and forth. And it really is a beautiful celebration of what Star Wars is, while being in its own way a beautiful celebration of what Mel Brooks was, of what John Candy was, of what Rick Moranis was. I mean, there's so many, lionized figures in this that there's so many things you can just take time to appreciate.
All right, so we're at the point now where, as I was thinking about Spaceballs, I started thinking about some of the other, references and spoofs of Star Wars that there have been over the years. And there have been plenty of TV shows and movies that have either given a nod to Star Wars or, flat out parodied it. And one of my favorites is the Family Guy trilogy. I think it lost steam towards the end, but especially the original Blue Harvest, which was what makes these work is it's pretty much, what you quote unquote a shot for shot remake, but just with, Family Guy style gags along the way. Mm-hmm. And they don't all land, but there's enough of it that there's some pop culture references. There's some making fun of the movie itself. There's some self-aware making fun of, the show that's making fun of the movie. So again, it's one of those things I think strikes a good balance so that it works.
That's honestly on my top two as well. And like you said, Family Guy, it's the ultimate, hit or miss show at times. But it's one of those shows that throws so many darts at the dartboard where it's like, if a joke misses, 2 minutes later, you're probably laughing at something else. And for me, I just keep thinking of, I've had the time of my life in the first.
You think that's hilarious. I didn't think that joke landed at all. But that's the good thing too, is there's such a diversity in in the jokes that, like you said, one doesn't work for you. There's probably something a minute later that's gonna.
Yeah. And there's Seth MacFarlane. I mean, we've seen as he's approached this Orville show he does now, which is very much like the old school Star Trek, but adapted through his kind of comedic lens. He is someone similar to Mel Brooks, where he loves Star Wars. You can see that through the jokes, through the references, through the little bits with things like the stormtroopers and stuff like that. There is a real understanding of the Star Wars mechanics and universe. And with the Family Guy, joke a minute approach, you're able to cover some really interesting ground with that.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things from that original one is, again, it's something that's really relatable, which I think if you're telling jokes at some level, they have to be relatable, is when they're when they've escaped the Death Star and the TIE fighters are after the Millennium Falcon and they're in the turret guns, and he's going and he's like singing the music as he's shooting them. Dun, 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 dun. It's just like, I would totally be doing that if I was in that seat.
It's funny you mentioned Family Guy, because I think the other Star Wars parody that really sticks to mind for me is from Seth Green, who plays Chris in Family Guy, and that's Robot Chicken. I absolutely I mean, Robot Chicken can be a very hit or miss show also. But what they did with Star Wars, I absolutely love. I love everything with the Empire and just how he's this kind of conniving businessman. And he's like, oh, the aluminum falcon, what the heck is that? And just his just cluelessness and arrogance. But you have all these different kind of lenses. You have Donald Faison voicing a stormtrooper, and you kind of have this menial, kind of grunt like perspective of him having to take his daughter to work day and things like that. And then, I mean, the ultimate gamut of having George Lucas as himself and going through a fan convention of a nerd dressed as a tauntaun. So I just love the Robot Chicken one. I really think it runs the gamut of Star Wars.
Yeah, and I think that though Seth MacFarlane and wow, I'm drawing a blank on his name. Creative Robot Chicken, please
Seth
help me out.
Green.
We're live. Thank you. The two of them share some common threads in terms of their approach to humor. So I think that there are some connecting threads there, and they even like joke about at the end of the Star Wars one, at the end of Blue Harvest, it's just like, well, yeah, but didn't Robot Chicken beat you to this like 6 months ago? And it's just like, well, yeah, but nobody watches that show. So yeah, those two are kind of like, I think, sort of the gold standard. You will find there are episodes or scenes in different movies that will call back to Star Wars, and a couple that that come to mind for me. Apparently, and now I haven't seen the show, so maybe you can fill me in before I get into those. A few people have recommended to me, because I've never seen the show, starting off with the Star Wars episode of Phineas and Ferb.
I watched Phineas and Ferb as a kid. I never have seen the Star Wars episodes, oddly enough, but I actually have heard they're pretty good. What I'll say about Phineas and Ferb, it's a very high concept type show where you have this kind of sandbox concept of the kids getting up to different mischief every episode. But I do think there's a real creative vision and at least some real interesting kind of ideas brought to the table, where they can go to Egypt and do all these kind of worldly things. So I've actually heard the Star Wars Phineas and Ferb episodes are quite good. So you actually now have me interested to kind of go back into the vault and find those.
I've been given that homework assignment, and just like in school, I'm behind on my homework. So, but anyway, one of the other, like, there was always kind of a running thing in that 70s show, and that was more touching into Star Wars fandom, because Eric was such a big Star Wars fan. And, so I loved some of the ways that they would kind of slide Star Wars in. And of course, that show was all about, tying the storyline into, the 70s era and inserting references that people who are teenagers in the 70s would be like, oh yeah, that's funny because I experienced that. But yeah, so that's a show that I think did a nice job of referencing and paying homage to Star Wars and its place and time in a funny way, without like actually. Well, I guess they did do a couple of like parody kind of scenes to it, but without like straight up parodying it.
Yeah, I think I love that as an example, and I really do, because you have the Eric perspective of someone who knows the lore down to the nitty gritty and knows everything, and he like speaks in the vernacular and stuff like that. And then you have like the Red Foreman character who's completely disconnected from it all and has no idea about any of its relevance or its impact, and just thinks it's silly. And just having those two extremes kind of meeting at the middle constantly is just so funny. And like you said, Eric is really the quintessential Star Wars fan.
One of the funny, there was the episode like that they did that was like the day that Star Wars came out. Um, and like the last scene of that episode, and obviously like at the beginning of that episode, Eric's all hyped up about it and everything like that. The last scene of the episode is actually Red and Kitty sitting in the theater. And Red's staring there looking at the screen, with that look that he does. And he's just like, Eric liked this? And that kid's on dope. And then there's this big explosion and he goes, whoa. And then kind of smiles a little bit. So it's like, it was one of those things that was just like, yeah, the kid's still on dope, but that was pretty cool.
He started to understand it for a second there. He let his guard down.
But yeah, and one of the other ones, and this was, I think it was from season 1 of Scrubs. Did you ever watch the show Scrubs?
I have, but I'm blanking on this moment, so I'm excited to see you.
So basically, it's a very short moment in season 1, where Dr. Cox performs a procedure that he wasn't supposed to, and Kelso comes in and starts yelling at him, and JD was involved in the whole thing. And as he's watching them go back and forth, like as he does his, like he always does his imagination scenes, it's Dr. Cox is Obi-Wan, and Kelso is this Darth Vader kind of character, and it shows everyone else, and the women have their hair all crazy, but they have like surgical instruments like sticking out of there, and medical instruments, and the janitor is like furry, like Chewbacca. And so it's just like this. Obviously I'm doing a terrible job of describing it, but it's one of those scenes that in the context of the episode, it works really well. And he ends up suspending, Dr. Cox ends up getting suspended, so he gets kind of cut down the way that Obi-Wan does in the first one. But it's, so that's one of those examples, I think, of, how, and that show was what, early 2000s?
Yeah, definitely.
I want to say. 2000s. So that was at a point where, it was, I guess the prequels were, a thing, if I'm remembering my dates right. But it was just showing that you can still make these references in a time frame that is completely separate from the original source material, and people are still going to get it and it's still going to land. So
yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that time period, because one of the other parody spoofs, and I kind of put that lightly with this one, it's a movie called Fanboys, which is about a group of Star Wars fans that make a trip, a pilgrimage in a way, to the Lucas farm to
the
see
Skywalker Ranch.
Yeah, the Skywalker Ranch, to see an early showing of the Phantom Menace. This movie is a little all over the place. There is kind of a melodramatic kind of undertone to it, with one of the serious subplots, and also some kind of hit or miss jokes. But it is the ultimate kind of fan homage kind of to Star Wars and everything about it. Not only the movies itself, but kind of just the fan, obsession and fervent kind of support around it. So it is an interesting movie in that way, where it is kind of acting as a relic of this period of Star Wars fans where, everything was roses with Phantom Menace. And I think one of the funniest little gags in the movie is this acknowledgement that, hey, maybe this movie might actually suck. So it's an interesting kind of hit or miss movie, but I think it is a cool little artifact as this kind of slice of Star Wars fandom.
All right. Well, if anybody who's listening has any references or any Star Wars parodies that they find particularly, you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, it looked like I lost you for a second there. But if anybody out there has any suggestions on things that we should see, feel free to send those over. Speaking of things that we should or should not see, kind of getting off of the topic of Spaceballs, but on the topic of sequels slash remakes, I think that you have an assessment of Lilo and Stitch, and I would love to hear it.
Yeah, so I was really interested to see Lilo and Stitch. I actually saw it just this past Sunday, so like a couple weeks after it's been out. I know it was a huge hit at the box office and has kind of gotten some divisive reactions with the fans. I personally liked it. I think, firstly, I think this movie does a great job capturing the Lilo and Stitch animation, like especially with Stitch. I think the problem with a lot of these Disney remakes, bring animation to live action, is the look of some of these things have had kind of a hidden valley type thing where it's instead of, ingratiating you into the world further, you're more, distracted just by the techniques. Like the Snow White movie, for instance, like how the dwarfs looked. I always joked with Ryan, it was like they just got a shine at the car wash or something. There was very just something off-putting and unrealistic. But Stitch here has a great sense of presence as a visual, CGI creation. His fur, everything about him moves really well. And I also think the same with the alien characters. So that's, I think, one of the strengths. The other, I think this movie does have a good understanding of the tone of Lilo and Stitch. Yes, there is some kind of big narrative departures, but I do think some of them are being kind of overblown. I do think this movie still captures the Ohana means family kind of messaging that made the original so special. And I think there are some kind of unique, funny aspects to this. You have Zach Galifianakis in Billy Magny's now as these kind of comedic foils as the aliens chasing Stitch. And I thought their comedic interplay was actually a lot of fun. And I just think also the movie does a decent enough job of capturing those special beats about the first one where it's a remake that you're not totally miserable the whole time and not totally like, I need to just watch the old one instead.
Yeah, I have not seen Lilo and Stitch yet, but going off of your, and I also haven't seen Snow White, but going off of your premise on Snow White, from what I saw, the dwarves were really off-putting to me, and I don't know, I have kind of a little bit of a theory about Snow White in general. The original movie was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. If they wanted to make a successful remake, they probably would have been better off making the Seven Dwarfs instead of making Snow White. Because in the original movie, the truly interesting characters, none of them are Snow White. So,
yeah, and the dwarves in this movie, not to get too into the weeds with it, are really a background presence. Like they barely have any kind of role within the movie. So it's definitely a reverse of that from the original.
So, admittedly, from the outside looking in, but from my perspective, it seems like they dulled one of the most interesting parts of the original Disney story. I'm saying the original Disney story because, and just making this movie Snow White and not Snow White and the Seven Dwarves really kind of hamstrung it.
Yeah. I will say this, like I give the writer some credit of trying to give the Snow White character some more agency within the story. Like I do think that's respectable, but I just think everything from the music to the performances, there it just feels really kind of generic and kind of lifeless, where it felt like Disney being like, we got to keep the remake trend going. What's next? Where Lilo and Stitch, I do see more of a connection with the writer director, with the material, and trying to actually continue the fabric of that. So,
yeah, I also wonder if, trying to give an uninteresting character a more interesting story, more often than not can just end up feeling forced, because you are, uh, I mean, the fact of the matter is that's what the character was in this story. And, not everything needs to be a shot by shot remake, but if you're deviating too much, then I think that for audiences who are fans of, or at least more intimately familiar with the original, it doesn't feel right. It feels forced.
The other thing I'll say too is Disney's, it's like they're running out of movies to remake at this point. Like Moana is coming up next, and the original Moana came out like a decade ago, and it's like I feel like they're almost the well has kind of run dry in a way with this type of approach, even though there are still the occasional ones like Lilo and Stitch that do actually pass the test.
And I wonder too, and this is something that we may have talked about previously, but it was definitely brought up a couple of episodes ago with my friends at Mickey and Minutes. We were talking about like movies that didn't do overly well, animated movies, the first time around. Things like Atlantis, things like Treasure Planet. Are these opportunities to, try to translate those into something live action? If you're looking for live action material, do you kind of look to some of these things that had promising or even good premises and characters, but just for whatever reason didn't resonate, and it may not have anything or may not have as much to do with the quality of the film as it does the time period when it came out?
Yeah, I think Atlantis is a movie that I could definitely see the live action potential, because I think, Treasure Planet is a movie I like a lot, but I don't know if it had as strong of a cult like following as Atlantis, where I do think people have a real attachment to that movie and a lot of the characters and kind of the world that it builds. I think the only problem with trying to adapt either of those is just the budget that would be required. Like both would have to be expensive movies just based on the effects and the world building. And we've seen with Disney, like science fiction has kind of become their Achilles heels of the last, 10, 15 years, with like John Carter, being a big bomb, Tomorrowland being a big bomb. Elio, which just came out, is already not doing well at the box office. So that's some unfortunate risk factors that I think would prevent Disney from pursuing it. But man, would I love an Atlantis live action remake. I think that'd be exceptional.
What I've read of Elio so far has seemed pretty positive, but to me, this is one of those movies that it seems like there are times when there's such a huge disconnect between the creative team and the marketing team, and there are times when they have quality films that they just have no idea how to get in front of people. I remember, and I mean, the time frame was a little bit different. There were different circumstances in the world, but I remember Encanto. Now, Encanto has managed to, be very popular, but I remember the first, outside of like, seeing that, oh, Disney's coming out with this movie Encanto, the first reference to Encanto that I saw in like marketing was like for like a fabric softener commercial. And I had no context as to who any of these characters were, so it didn't make any sense to me. Like, what was going on? Like, they had Peppa like raining on something. I was just, but without having seen the movie, I had no idea why that was happening, or just so it seems at times that Disney's filmmaking and creative side and their marketing side just don't connect, and they can't figure out how to take a product that may be good and actually package it in a neat enough way that makes people want to go see it.
Yeah, and I think it's no secret Disney's struggled to cultivate like new original hits. And I think even one of their executives recently said, yeah, we've struggled to do this. But what's the alternative? Making 27 Toy Story movies? You know, it's like
They're
you
doing that
kind of
too.
well, it's like you kind of need to take these risks. And a movie like Elio, I could spend days talking about it. It's one of those movies where it had a creative reset where there was a whole other concept of what this movie was going to be that got kind of scrapped, and then it became this kind of Frankenstein in a way. But I do think, you know, Disney and Pixar, it's a struggle that they're coming to of how can we build the next great generation of Pixar and Disney films without relying on these kind of respected forefathers, you know, the classic touchstone movies that audiences keep going back for more. So it really, you think about this decade, it's like, you know, Elementals I liked a lot, but it, you know, it did okay. It wasn't a big hit. I actually think Encanto is probably their movie that has had the most, you know, cultural staying power, even though it didn't do great in theaters because of the pandemic. But outside of that, they really haven't had that movie that kind of captures that kind of energy. That's been an original story.
All right. So before I let you go, we are in the midst of summer. Are there any summer movies that you are really looking forward to, or any summer movies that you've seen already that you're saying, hey, go see this?
I'd say the two big ones I'm looking forward to have to be Superman and Fantastic Four. I think both look great, and the fact that both characters really haven't been great on the big screen in such a long time will be really exciting. As far as movies to see, that's such a great question. There's so many movies. I actually really like the new John Wick movie, The Ballerina. As far as like if you're looking for a popcorn action movie, some of the set pieces are absolutely incredible. There's a close quarters flamethrower fight that it was absolutely amazing. So that'll be my recommendation for those looking for a chill popcorn movie.
All right, sir. And one final question. Have you seen the second season of Andor yet?
I have not. I watched like 2 episodes, then had to go on vacation and just haven't gotten back into it. So I think I have a little break coming up ahead. I'm gonna just reset with season 2, just go through it all and have a great time.
You just had to go to Disney World.
I just had to say goodbye to the poor Muppets. Yeah,
I'm excited for the Muppets area, or for the Monsters Inc. area. I think that that's going to be great, and I do think that there is potential for the Electric Mayhem at Rock and Roller Coaster. So
I think so too. I just hope they slow it down a little bit so I actually go on it.
you know, it's funny. That was one that when I was younger, like I had to get dragged on, like literally dragged on. And now I love it. I absolutely love it. So, I always thought it's more, I guess as an adult, I've thought that it was always a weird, marrying of like Aerosmith and Disney, because there's no real connection otherwise, you know. At first I thought, well, maybe Disney owns the record label that they are signed on to, but no, that wasn't the case. It just, you know, so especially with them retiring, you're trying to do something, you know, new with it. So you know, plus Steven Tyler's had his own, you know, PR issues at best.
I know it's almost amazing it's been around as long as it has, to be honest.
All right, sir. Well, I will give you one more time to tell people who you are, how they can find your podcast, and anything you've talked about lately, or topics you've got coming up, or anything else you want to say.
Yeah, so you can check out Pop Culture Chats with Ryan and Matt on Spotify or any other podcast service. We'll be talking about a lot of summer movies, NBA free agency, all that fun stuff. I haven't really been writing a lot, but maybe that'll change if I get some more free time. Who knows? But yeah, that's a great spot to check out what I'm up to.
Yeah, we've certainly got a lot to talk about with the Celtics. I mean,
For sure.
I mean, you could spend 3 episodes on the legacy of Kristaps Porzingis in Boston.
Yeah. Injuries.
I mean, you could say that the are you familiar with for the Southie St. Patrick's Day parade the Borgs?
Oh yeah.
Probably the single greatest contribution that he had was giving the inspiration for the Kristaps Porzingis, which was actually, I think I saw it on the Boston Police Department's social media when they were confiscating.
My God.
So that will be the lasting contribution to his time in Boston for me.
A proud legacy indeed.
All right, Matt, thank you very much. And let's hope that Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money, is as successful as we hope it will be.
Let's hope.
Well, thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of the Maza's Musings podcast. This was a lot of fun. I mean, anytime that I have a chance to talk about or watch Spaceballs, just give me that opportunity. And it's clear that Matt feels the same way. This is, as I said, one of those classic movies, just a classic comedy, regardless of genre. Just a great film. If you haven't given it a try or haven't seen it in a while, I recommend going and checking it out. While you're checking things out, be sure to check out our social media. We are on Facebook at the Maza's Musings Podcast. We are on Twitter, Threads, and Instagram at Maza's Musings Pod. We're on TikTok at Maza's Musings Podcast. We're also on Blue Sky, and we are on YouTube. So go ahead and click that subscribe button, and you can see a lot of our episodes do include video. So feel free to subscribe there, and we'd very much appreciate it. We'd also appreciate if you left a rating and review or told your friends about this podcast. But the ratings and reviews help bump us up in those algorithms that make us more visible to more people, so more people can join in this community that we're building here. I'd also love it if you guys would contribute by buying us a blue milk, which will help with some of the monetary costs that go into putting this podcast together. And of course, you can find all of that information right on our website, mazasmusings.wordpress.com. And while you're there, you can find past episodes. You can find out more about me and this podcast. You can sign up for our newsletter, which, just click the button, enter your email, and you will get once a week in your inbox a letter from the Maza's Musings Podcast, which will let you know about things that are coming up, things that you might have missed. We'll shout out other podcasts. We will also give you information on things that we think are cool. Could be contests or sweepstakes, could be news, whatever. But we figure if it's interesting to us and you listen to our podcast, you'd find it interesting as well. So you can find all that information right there at mazasmusings.wordpress.com. Once again, thank you to everybody who's listening. I appreciate however you decide to support us, whether it's just simply listening all the way to buying us a blue milk, everything in between. I appreciate it all. And I hope you have a great weekend and a great week. For the Maza's Musings podcast is brought to you by Hi Dad Soup. check them out at Mickey and Minutes on Instagram.